welcome to the free Spanish non-lucrative visa webinar. Today is April the 2nd, 2025. My name is Bruno Bianchi Sarcone, and the way we structure this webinar is a timeline before the application, during the application, and after the approval. We're going to talk about definitions, consulates and BLS outsourcing services, tourist and resident visa status, tax considerations as well, non-lucrative visa eligibility and requirements. We're going to go in depth into the most important ones. Then during the application, the timeline, timing and application process. And after the approval, how you arrive to Spain, if you plan to renew, if you plan to obtain the long-term residence after 5 years, potentially obtain the Spanish citizenship, and maybe transition to work permits. Small disclaimer here, the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and is not legal advice. The requirements listed here are not official. Check, please, your specific consulates and BLS office, if applicable, requirements. A little bit about Spainguru. But first, what is the objective of Spainguru? Facilitating the relocation process for English-speaking foreigners to Spain since 2014. We have there some nice reviews. And as you can see on the top bar and the green bar, there's a button that will redirect you to Trustpilot. It takes only 5 seconds of your time if you want to leave a review, if you think the information I shared today is of value for you or anyone else, or if you're happy with Spainguru in general, you can always leave a review there. And what can you find Spainguru? Well, there's 2 ways to use Spainguru. First of all, the website is spanguru.es. First of all, I have personally vetted more than 100 services, including immigration experts that can help you with your NLV application, tax advisors, financial planners, compliant health insurances. You will for sure need a compliant health insurance for your non-lucrative visa application. Unless you are a UK retiree, you can use your S1 form to access the public healthcare in Spain. You will need medical certificates, sworn translations, apostle services in the US and the UK, and potentially auxiliary services like bank accounts, money transfer, property rentals, mortgages if you plan to purchase property in Spain. All those services, I have personally vetted people that can help you out with them. But of course, you can use Spainguru.es for so many more things that are absolutely free to join, and you can opt out anytime. For example, the weekly newsletter that I send every Monday with the top 10 discussions, top most watched video, and top blog post of the week. YouTube channel with more than 850 videos, soon to have 1,000 videos, half of them about the non-lucrative visa. Blog with more than 1,700 articles as of last week. And of course, if you haven't joined yet, Spanish immigration Facebook groups, dedicated non-lucrative visa groups with a total aggregated of 140,000 members. So that's how you can use Spainguru.es to help your move to Spain. Now let's go with the timeline before the application. What is the Spanish non-lucrative visa? This is a visa that is intended for non-EU citizens who can financially support themselves and who don't need to work in Spain. Now, the law and regulations that define this visa are 2. First, the main organic law, and second, the regulation of that law. The main organic law hasn't changed in 25 years. Now, the regulation that regulates this law has recently been modified, and those effects will take effect. Those changes will take effect on May 20th, 2025. So until that date, we're having the current, or also, let's say, old regulation of the main organic law. And then after May 20th, the new regulation will take effect. So have that date in mind. Now, let's talk about consulates in the US, UK, and also Canada, because on Spainguru, you can find a list of dedicated pages for each one of those consulates. Very important, you cannot apply for the non-lucrative visa anywhere in the world. You have to apply from the consulate that serves the area where you are a legal resident, or potentially if you hold a nationality. For example, imagine you have dual citizenship, Colombian and American. You could also potentially apply from a consulate in Colombia because you hold that citizenship, even if you're not technically a resident in Colombia. Okay, you can find the list of those consulates and the areas that they serve on Spainguru.es/Spain non-lucrative visa. Okay, and also all the links to the official requirements and BLS offices and so on and so on. And not only that, I'll give you an example. Here, if you go to the menu, Spanish visas, non-lucrative visa, find your consulate in the USA, and you select New York, for example, I aggregate all the content that is created that relates to that consulate or BLS office. Example here, New York, all the first-hand experiences from the users of Spainguru's community that tell their story, exactly how it happened to them, and I'm sure it's going to be super helpful for you to read. Of course, that is not legal advice, but you will find a lot of tips and tricks that may be useful for you. And as you know, consulates are very, very different among themselves. So it's very interesting that you understand how your consulate works. And the case of New York is very particular nowadays because they don't use a third party to process the visa. Still, you have to deal with the consulate directly. But most of the consulates, like all of them in the UK, and most of the consulates in the US, like Miami, DC, now Los Angeles and San Francisco, for example, to mention a few, work with a third party, which is an Indian company, huge company called BLS International. As you can see there, it is they are on the Indian Stock Exchange. If you want to invest in them, you can potentially. They operate in 64 countries, and they do the outsourcing of many procedures. Okay, so it is important that you understand that whether your consulate works with this third party. In the UK, all of them do. In the US and Canada, depending on the consulate, they do work with BLS International for the non-lucrative visa or not. Sometimes they do the Schengen visa, but not the non-lucrative visa. So in that case, you will have to deal with BLS International instead than with your consulate. So when you check the official requirements, actually, you need to check your consulate's English requirements, Spanish requirements, like in English and in Spanish, and also check the requirements from BLS International, just to make sure that all the lists coincide and you are not missing any paperwork. And unfortunately, they are not identical. You will see that some of the lists have an extra document, some others are missing that because they are not mirroring each other. There are maybe some lagging when they update those lists. So it's important to stay on top and make sure that you are not missing anything. Now, let's talk about visa requirements for Spain, immigration status when you go to Spain as a visitor or if you plan to stay longer. Tourist visa eligibility. For example, British, US citizens, Canadians, Australians can stay in Spain and other Schengen countries for up to 90 days within a 6-month period without needing a tourist visa. This is a rolling period. Okay, some nationalities require a Schengen visa to enter this area of 28 countries that is internally borderless. And they will need this Schengen visa to enter as tourists. For example, Philippines. Okay. Now, the general visa requirements. If you're a non-EU citizen and you plan to stay more than 90 days in Spain specifically, you must secure a temporary or long-term visa. By definition, the non-lucrative visa or residence is a temporary residence because it technically offers you 5 years under that type of residency. Now, for the residency or visa that is longer than 5 years is the long-term residence, and this is called long-term, as you say, also known as permanent residence. Okay, citizens from European Union countries and associate countries like Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, as well as their spouses, are exempt from this requirement, like the non-lucrative visa, but they must fulfill other conditions. So if you have the possibility to obtain a European Union country or associate country passport, some people have been always writing in the community saying like, I have the possibility to obtain the Irish passport or the Italian passport and so on. Potentially, it should be considered better to obtain those EU nationalities and move to Spain using that document and also their spouses, piggybacking them, okay, because they have to fulfill less difficult requirements as the non-lucrative visa, specifically about financial requirements, okay? And also, you have to renew less. For example, if you're a new citizen and you move to Spain, after 90 days, you get your permit to live in Spain and you have to have some money in the bank, but you don't have to renew for the next 5 years, and it will also include a work permit. So definitely something to consider. But if you don't have that possibility, then the non-lucrative visa would be also one of your options. Now, let's talk about tax residence in Spain. You become a tax resident in Spain and must pay tax on your global income and potentially tax on the net value of your assets as of December 31st, if any of these 3 conditions apply. The first one and most common one is if you spend over 183 days in Spain within a calendar year from January 1st to December 31st, okay? And that is physical presence. It doesn't matter your immigration status. It doesn't matter if you're a tourist or if you're a visa holder or residency holder. If you're physically in Spain more than 183 days or 183 days in Spain, you are automatically considered a tax resident in Spain. And so, therefore, you have to make sure that you count your days in Spain correctly, because some people forgot They moved in the second half of the year, and they forgot that they were at the beginning of the year as tourists, and those days also add up for being considered a tax resident in Spain. The second condition is your main economic activity or primary income sources in Spain, regardless of spending less than 183 days in the country. And also, even if you spend less than 183 days in Spain, if your spouse or minor children are permanent residents in Spain, you could also be considered to be a tax resident in Spain and therefore be liable for income tax, etc. Now, taxes overview, just so that you have a general idea about taxes. First obligation, let's say the second obligation in the tax calendar year is the income tax. That deadline is the June 30th, okay? You will be taxed on your worldwide income if you're a tax resident in Spain at progressive rates of between 19% to 47%. There is a small variations depending on the region, okay? Now, example given, if you're making 100K per year, a lot of people think that they will be paying 45% tax. This is not really true. And we will talk about that in the next slide. You will be paying around 36, 37% effective tax rate, okay? Of course, there will be allowances and specific situations depending on the type of income that you have, but this is just so that you have an idea. Now, the first obligation also is to present a foreign asset reporting, also known as Form 720, and you have to do it, actually, it expired, the deadline was March 31st for 2024. And this is mandatory if you hold assets abroad. For the different categories of assets, if you are over a threshold of 50,000 euros, you have to declare those assets and rights held abroad. For example, you have bank accounts, different bank accounts with a total of 50,000 euros or more, you have to declare those bank accounts, properties, etc. Then there is wealth tax, okay, which is a regional tax applied to the net value of your declared assets by December 31st. And it depends by region. For example, in Madrid, there is a very high threshold, almost like not having wealth tax. It's 3 million euros plus the allowances and exemptions. And in Andalusia also, there is a 100% rebate. Okay, so if you're over a certain threshold, you file, but you don't pay nothing. And then there is the solidarity tax, which is a national wealth tax that applies everywhere in Spain from a very much higher threshold, which is 3 million euros plus an allowance of, I think, 700,000 euros, okay, that also will tax the net value of your assets. Now, of course, Spain has double taxation agreements with both the USA, the UK, and many, many countries, so that you are not taxed twice. So basically, you will file your taxes in Spain first, and whatever you paid in Spain, you will deduct it from your taxes in the other country. Now, very important, there are very big variations between the regions, and it is very important to consult a tax advisor. For example, you can find on Spanguru.es. So just 2 slides about taxes, so you have this also in mind, so you have a better consideration about this. This is how the tax brackets work. So, for example, if you're making 100K, you will see on the right a table that for 100K, there is the fifth bracket that goes from 60 to 300K, 45% tax. So you would say, like, if I'm making 100K, I'm going to be paying 45% tax? No. Because the way they work is that the first 12,450 euros, you will pay 19%. The next tranche, from 12,451 to 20,200, you will pay 24%. And you will only pay 45% from 60,000 to 100,000. So only 40,000 of your income will pay 45% only, okay? So effectively, you will be paying around 36%, which is, let's say, some sort of median or average on those brackets, if you understand me. Okay, of course, this is just for illustrative purposes only. And here I have calculated the effective tax rates for the different amount of income. For example, if you're making 30K of taxable income, you will be paying an effective rate of 24%, 40,000 euros, 26%, 50,000, 29%, 60,000, 30%. As you can see, it is a progressive effective tax rate, okay? Of course, I'm not talking about allowances or deductions, or if you are receiving a public pension that will not be taxed in Spain. I'm not talking about that. This is just for the purpose of explaining you how you calculate your tax brackets, okay? Because in Spain, they love to have tax brackets for the different taxes and progressive rates. Okay, this applies to several taxes out there, and they all work, let's say, the same way. Now, let's go back to the immigration things. NLV documentation. This is a summary. Always check official requirements. First, they will ask you to select an address in Spain. Okay, most of the consulates are not very strict. You just write the province where you plan to move. Some consulates will require you to show a rental contract. Some people are renting Airbnbs for 3 months and then they cancel them, etc., etc. I have recently interviewed Ainhoa Manero from Stern Abogados, 55 frequently asked questions, and one of the questions was, do I have to show a rental contract? And she said, absolutely not. She always fights this in those very strict consulates like Houston or Boston or Chicago that require this, but really it's outside of any official requirements, and she always wins. Okay, so this is the case that, of course, many people, just to avoid friction, they will get their contracts, they will risk maybe their money, okay, and get those contracts just to not add friction into their processes, but shouldn't be that way. Now, second, address in country of residence. You will have to prove that you are a legal resident within the area that is served by that specific consulate. So in order to apply there, as we said before, you will have to prove sufficient financial means to support yourself and dependents, if applicable, without working. Have comprehensive health insurance from a company authorized to operate in Spain, or S1 form for UK retirees if you prefer. Clean criminal background check, squeaky clean in the last 5 years. We're going to talk about all this in depth. Medical certificate is completely different from health insurance, where you show that you're free of diseases that could have serious public health repercussions, according to the protocol of 2005. Spouses, if you plan to go as a couple. New marriage certificate, apostille and sworn translated. Dependent children, if you plan to bring your children. New birth certificates issued by the authorities that, for example, if you were married somewhere else, or or your children were born somewhere else, you will have to obtain an official original copy of those certificates, sworn translated, and also apostille them. And many consulates are asking a document, swearing, saying that you will not engage in any work or professional activities in Spain, potentially also remotely. Sometimes you will also be required to present a letter of intent. Sometimes, even if it's not required, it is interesting to present a letter of intent because you're explaining your finances and your movements and making it easier for the official review in your case to understand your situation. And then you will have to show photos, present photos, fees payments, etc., etc. And as I said, if you go to Spainguru's YouTube channel, I recently interviewed Ainhoa Manero. These 2 videos is 20 minutes each, 55 frequently asked questions, all answered by this top immigration lawyer. I highly recommend you to watch those videos. There you have the QR code, or just go to Spainguru's YouTube channel and search FAQs, and they will come up. Now, let's talk about the financial requirements in 2025 for the non-lucrative visa. You will have to show proof of sufficient funds, how much money you need to show, including could be savings and or a regular passive income. It has to be passive, okay? Now, the main applicant will be 400% of the IPREM index of 2024 or 2025. They remained exactly the same, and each dependent 100% of the IPREM index of 2024 or 2025. This translated into money, the minimum financial threshold for the main applicant is 28,800 euros in 1 year, and for each dependent is 7,200 euros, okay? We're going to talk about the IPREM index in the next slide. As you can see there, on the right side, you have a table. If you apply as a couple, it will be 28.8K plus 7.2K, 36K minimum threshold. As we said, it can be savings and or passive income, could be pension withdrawals, rental income. Be careful with the rental income because not always it is accepted. Actually, lately, most of the time, it is not really accepted by the consulate, so it should be used as a complement, okay, just to make more case of your financial stability. Could be dividends, and you will prove this financial situation through bank statements and documentation from your bank in wherever you have your money or you're receiving the payments, okay? Some consulates will also ask for tax returns. Sometimes it would be necessary to show those tax returns, especially if you are coming with adult children, for example, and you want to make a case that they are financially dependent on you, etc., etc. And something very important to have in mind is that you will probably need to show double the amount for the renewal, and there are big regional variations, okay? It is truly double the amount if you only present savings. So, for example, if you're a couple and you are presenting savings of 36,000 euros, then when you renew in most regions in Spain, you will have to prove you have savings of 72,000 euros. But if it's passive income, it will not be counted that way, and we're gonna see that. And we say regional variations because, for example, in Madrid, they're still requiring only 1 year of savings, or the same requirements as in the initial application. We said we were going to talk about the iPrem index. As you can see, this is an index that is the base of the financial requirements of this visa and many other things. As you can see, in 2023, 24, and now 25 didn't change, but it could change anytime. It depends on political agreement, because this iPrem index is included in the general budget of Spanish state, but there has to be a political agreement in order to have a new budget. Otherwise, they copy the previous one, okay? And right now, there is no political agreement, so it stays the same. But it could happen in the future, there is agreement, and they update the iPrem, and as you can see, it always goes up, always. Imagine that in 2026, it goes from 600 per month to 650. That will increase, of course, the requirements for your renewals, okay, to 31.2K for the main applicant and 7.8K for dependents. And this is something that you need to budget accordingly. $1 million question. Can I work remotely for non-Spanish companies? A lot of people are asking this. And I will just repeat what Ainhoa Manero, top expert from External Abogados, who I personally recommend. I have asked her this, okay? And you can watch the YouTube video, the interview there. You see the QR code there. And basically, if you say that you plan to work at the consulate when you apply, you will be denied your visa, ipso facto, okay? But if you apply for the visa, you're approved, you use savings and passive income, etc. And once you are in Spain, you are working remotely because you have a previous remote work that you didn't disclose, or you start a remote work in Spain for non-Spanish companies, okay, from within Spain, it is a gray area, okay? Now there is the digital nomad visa that is better suited for this type of situation, but a lot of people that I personally know, a lot of them are under non-lucrative visa, working remotely. They pay their taxes. They're Spanish tax residents after 183 days. They pay taxes on the global income. They pay, but they renew their non-lucrative visa not with that type of income. They renew it with passive income and savings, etc., but they're working remotely. And there's a Supreme Court decision that said that this is actually fine, and nothing happens to these people. Basically, this is a gray area, and this is happening. Okay, so that is the situation. Now, Edinburgh permits, and this is just to make the point on how the interpretation of the different consulates can be so varied, and also how they treat different work arrangements and approving non-lucrative visa with these work arrangements. Lately, Edinburgh included in the official requirements that you can actually work, okay? And specifically, they were referring to certain types of work. In this case, this Spainguru community member got their NLV approved because the husband had to work in an oil rig in a platform in the Northern Sea and had to travel every 15 days to work, but then come back to Spain to live under the non-lucrative visa. And this is accepted by Edinburgh Consulate. And also, if you watch the FAQs videos that I just showed you, I asked Ainhoa Manero about this, and she said that she had approved people that are pilots, for example, you know, airline pilots, that they need to work maybe once a month, and they travel to USA, they work 10 days as pilots, and then they come back to Spain, etc. So it is not actually 100%. You have to make a case, but of course, if you are in this situation, you have to go with a legal expert. Like, for example, Ainhoa. I also recommend other partners on Spanguru.es, but or anyone else that knows exactly what we're talking about. But definitely, it is doable. Now, let's go to private health insurance requirements. You have, unless you are a UK retiree, where you have the option or not to use the S1 form to have access to your public healthcare in Spain, okay, instead of hiring a private health insurance, then if you're not in this case, you will have to get a compliant health insurance policy that has no co-payments, no reimbursements, and I added there an asterisk because some consulates mention that they shouldn't have reimbursements either. No waiting periods, so full coverage from moment zero without waiting times. Full coverage, and I added an asterisk there because what happens if you have pre-existing conditions? We're going to talk about that, okay? But basically, you have to have full coverage, okay, from all the territory in Spain and also the different medical disciplines as well. And in most cases, at least for these conditions, you have to pay the full year in advance, Okay, if you have a Spanish bank account, potentially you could pay per month. Okay, but usually most of the people don't have a Spanish bank account, so you have to pay the full year in advance. And the companies will need this payment in order to issue the certificate of coverage that has to be in Spanish and has to have a very specific wording. And this is a required document to be submitted for the NLV application. FAQs. Are my medicines covered with a private health insurance? No, you have to pay retail price. What should be the health insurance start date? So many answers here, but I would say that the most common thing to do would be if you intend to enter on July 15th, for example, then the health insurance should start on July 1st. Usually they start on the first day of the month. So if you're applying, I don't know, in May, and you select you want to enter in July 15th, okay, then you ask when you hire the health insurance policy to start in July 1st, okay? Many health insurance policies cannot do it so much in advance, so that could be also a little bottleneck. But if you go with my recommended exclusive agent for Adeslas, he can actually extend the start date of the policy. This is one of the things that sets him apart. You can find him on Spainguru.es. And are there any health insurance for older than 75 years of age? As far as I know, DKV and Adeslas have options that are accepted for Spanish non-lucrative visa. What if I have pre-existing conditions? Now, coming back to the full coverage condition that I told you, there is a nuance here, okay? So the whole thing will depend on how severe your pre-existing condition is. Because if it is very severe, for example, if you had cancer in the last 5 years, there is a very high chance that you won't be able to find private health insurance to cover you, unfortunately. Now, if you have high blood pressure, something like that, potentially you will be covered for everything, but that pre-existing condition will be excluded, and still the health insurance company will be able to produce the certificate of coverage that will need to apply for the Spanish non-lucrative visa and potentially be accepted, okay? But then if you have any problem related to that pre-existing condition once you're in Spain, you will have to pay all the treatment out of the pocket. Now, the workaround also is that after 1 year, and going to the next frequently asked question, can I pay into the Spanish public system? Yes, after 1 year of residence in Spain, you could use the Convenio Especial, which is a scheme from the Social Security, that you can pay your access into the public healthcare system. That will cover your pre-existing conditions, not the medicine, but the treatment. Yes, for a cost of 60 euros per month for younger than 65 years of age, and 157 euros for older than 65. Okay, so that's the nuance about the full coverage. Can I use my current health insurance from the UK and USA? Short answer is, if it's NLV compliant, yes, why not? The long answer is, I highly don't recommend it. Okay, it is not expensive to have a fully compliant health insurance from a company authorized in Spain, and you will have less blocks on the road because your health insurance in the US and the UK could potentially be considered to be a travel health insurance, could potentially, the certificate of coverage maybe is not in Spanish, we need to swan translate it, many pages there, the wording maybe is not correct, maybe has reimbursement clauses, which are very common, okay, so those ones could be problematic as well. So long story short, I highly don't recommend it. Can I use my current health insurance? Oh, sorry, next frequently asked question. Can I apply with a UK S1 form if I am a UK retiree? As we said, yes. Do I need a Spanish bank account? No. If you want to pay monthly and you have a Spanish bank account already, that's something that you can discuss, okay? But generally, you don't need to do it, but you will have to pay 1 full year in advance. Can I pay? Can there be reimbursements? My answer is no. Many consulates, they strictly write it in their description of the visa compliance. Some of them don't mention it, but the officials that are reviewing your case could find that problematic. Okay, so personally, I wouldn't recommend going with a health insurance policy that has any reimbursements clauses. Okay, and I remember lately somebody from Houston was asking me about reimbursements, and you could read in their description that they don't accept reimbursements. Will I get a refund if I'm denied? That depends on the policy that you're hiring. Okay, so make sure you understand and you read everything. Okay, read all the small caps, read everything, and make sure to, when you talk to your broker, to your exclusive agent, ask, in the event of denial of my visa, will I get my money back? Because some of the refund policies are not complete. Maybe it will ask you that the visa has to be denied because of the health insurance and not because of any other reason. Maybe the refund is partial, is not in full. Okay, so make sure that you will get all your money back in the event of your visa denial. What are the top companies? You have Adeslas, ASA, Sanitas, Asisa, Salus, AXA, DKV, Caser, Mafre. And if size matters, Adesla is the top one with more than a quarter of the whole market, and is, if you can see there, 29% is if you sum Sanitas and Asisa, okay, that would be the size of Adesla. So very, very big health insurance company, probably the best value for money, in my humble opinion. But all of them are good, or all of them, if you go to check their, their Trustpilot reviews, etc., you will find a lot of people complaining. Mostly, I don't think those companies care about getting good reviews or not. But in general, my personal experience, I use private health insurance, and I have used for several years, is generally good. Of course, you will find some horror stories out there, like with any health insurance or bank or these sort of big companies out there, but generally they work well, any of them. Medical certificate. This is completely different than the health insurance. This is a one-page document. There on the right, you can see a template, both in Spanish and English, okay, in the same paper. And it has a 3-month validity. When you submit your paperwork, it needs to be within the window of validity. And lately, I have been hearing somebody at BLS San Francisco presented this document, and it only had 1 week of validity, and still it was said, no, you have to get a medical certificate that is valid for a longer time, because when the BLS sends the documentation to the consulate for review, it will not be valid anymore. That is absolutely crazy. And if you have a lawyer helping you with the presentation, this will be fight till the end, because it makes absolute no sense. But it is something that you have to have in mind. Not only you have to have valid documentation in order not to add friction to your process, also have it as fresh as possible. Now, let's talk about USA and UK medical certificates. The best you can do in any country is to use the template provided by your specific consulate that has the right wording, okay? And the best you can do is to have a one-page document in English and Spanish. And you have to make it signed by the doctor, both in English and in Spanish. If he or she signs only the English one, the Spanish one may consider not to be valid. In that case, you will need a sworn translation as well. Okay, so try to make sure to have both languages and both signed and stamped, wet ink stamp. Many doctors don't have stamps anymore, but you probably, from many years ago, this stamp that they used to put back in the day in the banks or in the post office, the consulates still love to see that, so try to include those. And something important, in the USA or in Canada, for example, this certificate doesn't need and cannot be apostilled, but in the UK, it does, and it has to be apostilled. Okay, in any case. And for it to be apostilled, the doctor has to be registered at the Foreign Office in the UK, FCDO registered doctor. You can use online services with discount on Spainguru.es for FCDO registered doctors, and that will provide you this medical certificate fully online. And if the certificate is only in English, as we said, you will also have to sworn translate it. Now, alternatively, there's also the option to use a Spanish doctor. There are pros and cons. The pros, it will be a Spanish certificate, doesn't need to be sworn translated, you will save that money, and it doesn't have to be apostilled, okay? Now, there has been some friction about this medical certificate in some consulates, specifically in Manchester, and I heard also Lisbon and San Francisco, that they require, and this is, again, going far more into the interpretation of the rule, that the person has to be physically in Spain at the time of the date in the certificate that was issued, okay? So be careful with that. But the doctor is, this certificate is widely accepted, for example, in London, in Edinburgh, in Miami, okay, in Singapore, I heard as well, even if you were not physically there at the time of issuance. So sometimes this could be an alternative. And if you're interested, you can contact the doctor also through Spainguru.es. And when you select which consulate you're applying from, the doctor will tell you, yes, I have no problem in this consulate, etc., etc. Okay, and it's absolutely free to contact the doctor just and ask any questions you want. FAQs. My doctor won't sign the medical certificate template. What can I do? Find another doctor. Okay. In the USA, some people go to some ER places and maybe they bring the paper and they get a signature. Sometimes it works. Some doctors, they will require you to do blood tests, urine tests, a lot of stuff just to sign this certificate, and that is probably too much. Maybe it's better to change the doctor, okay? Because usually they just look at the paper and they will just sign, and that's it. Now, my doctor is not FCDO registered for the UK. Is his certificate valid? No, because it cannot be apostille. It only takes 24 to 48 hours to register, and it can be done online. So it's something that you can suggest to your doctor. Okay. How do I know the Spanish doctor certificate is accepted at my consulate? Contact the Spanish doctor through Spainguru.es and ask directly, and maybe it is an alternative. And this is a table summarizing all that I said. Basically, in the USA and Canada, you don't need to apostille. If it's only in English, sworn translated, has to be fully signed, printed in the letterhead of the doctor. Okay, just make it look official. Now in the UK, you will need to apostille it. For that, a FCO registered doctor, and you can use services like ZoomDoc, okay, for online, and of course, sworn translated if it's only in English. And for Spanish doctor, make sure that it is accepted by your consulate, and then you will save during the translation and the apostille potentially. Now, clean criminal background check, the document that takes usually the longest to obtain. And I say usually because sometimes if you got married in Trinidad and Tobago or Cyprus or South Africa, etc., sometimes obtaining the marriage certificate, if you're planning to apply with your spouse, sometimes takes even longer than a criminal check. So something to have in mind when you are starting. It must be squeaky clean during the last 5 years, nothing, zero. And in the UK, it's called the ACRO. It needs to be apostilled and sworn translated that has a 6-month validity. Please check with your consulate. And then in the USA, the FBI background check that requires a federal apostille, okay, no state apostille, federal, and sworn translation as well. And it is usually 6 months valid, okay, but make sure to always check with your consulate, okay? And if you have been living in other countries in the previous 5 years for the non-lucrative visa, the digital nomad visa is 2 years. For the non-lucrative visa, you will need to also obtain criminal checks from those countries where you were resident those last 5 years. Now, frequently asked questions. Am I still eligible with records on my background check? If you have small things like misdemeanors, okay, driving under the influence, smoking pot maybe 25 years ago, 30 years ago, small things like this, it won't be a problem now. Now, depends on how serious it is. If you serve conviction time, blood crimes, etc., violent crimes, usually it's a denial if you have those records, even if they were decades ago. Now, if those crimes, let's say, or those records in Spain should be, let's say, unregistered because enough time has passed, you could make the case that they're present in your country, but in Spain they wouldn't be, and then that, if you explain that, then it would be fine. But this is something, one of the FAQs I asked to Ainhoa Manero, this is the way she does to help her clients, and she gets approvals doing this, okay? But of course, if you're in this situation, go with legal experts, in my opinion. Am I still eligible with a no live trace? This is for the ACRO in the UK. Yes, but usually now, lately, in the last months, the consulates are also asking you to submit a report showing what is the underlying record of that no live trace. That is the record that's been stepped down and it doesn't appear, but they will have a look to it. Can I expedite the background check federal apostille in the US? Not exactly expedite. I mean, not if you do it directly with the State Department or Department of State, sorry. But you could use private services. Like, for example, in Spanguru, we partner with Monument Visa, and in approximately 10 days, you can have it. Depends. That's let's say a premium service, but it's a private service. You don't have to do it that way. But if you're in a rush, you should consider it. Can I notarize the background check and use the state apostille instead? This has been done in the past, sometimes with success, but now it's a denial if you do it. Always use federal apostille. Where can I have my fingerprints taken? So there's different ways, okay? And also it depends if you're in the USA or outside. If you're in the USA, you can get a form where you put the wet ink in your fingers and you put your fingerprints and you put it in an envelope and you send it to FBI, or you go to a post office and you get your fingerprint scanned, or to a channeler, okay, that will scan your fingerprints and send directly to the Department of State. And then later you will need to get the apostille, the federal apostille. And what if my fingerprints are illegible? Send me an email and I will send you content with potential solutions for that problem. Now, some tips about the criminal background check. I need to update this, but hasn't changed that much, really. The agro was taking about 20 days, 30 days in order to arrive. In Canada, now the apostille is taking only 10 days. It used to take 4 months, okay, but now it's taking only 10 days. So great news for our Canadian friends. And now let's move to proof of not working. Now, this is also called the retirement visa, not only non-lucrative visa, but because generally people use this visa to retire in Spain. So proof of a receipt of a pension is the best proof you can show to tell the authorities that you are not going to be working or you're not working. If you're still working and you plan to quit before applying, in the UK, the P45 is what they want. In the US, resignation letter or termination letter from employer, both translated and notarized. And if you're a freelancer in the US, notarized affidavit promising not to work. And in the UK, a letter of HMRC, an accountant stating having ceased trading, and they register from self-employment. Now, frequently asked question, should I quit before I get the visa? A lot of people want to work until the very last moment and provided they get their visa granted. We're going to talk about that in the next slide. Is renting out a property considered a job? It depends how many properties you have and in which basis you are renting them from. For example, if you have 30 properties on Airbnb and you are dealing with that directly, that could be considered a job, active income. So size matters. In that case, you should appoint a property manager and just get the proceeds. Now, if you only have one property and you rent it long term, for example, that would be passive income. Okay, so if you're somewhere in between, you have to see how this could be considered by the official. Okay, they could be open to interpretations. Always try to be on the safe side. Is investing in stocks considered active income? No. Can I volunteer while on an NLV? Yes, you can, but don't get paid. Okay, don't get paid lunches or trips or anything. And I highly recommend you volunteering, joining charity, joining organizations that help others. I recommend it because it will help you get more in the culture, learning the language, helping others, strengthen your network, your support network, doing stuff, okay, feeling yourself active with a purpose, and so on and so on. A lot of people are very adamant about the fact that it says it's non-lucrative visa, you cannot work. No, non-lucrative, it means lucrative in Spanish. It means that you cannot get money, okay? It doesn't mean that you cannot work, okay? So basically I never heard anyone who has been volunteering having had problems renewing their visas or anything at all. Still working at the time of application. Now we're gonna, as I said, we're gonna treat the situation in which you plan to work until the very last moment. And I'm telling you, it depends on the consulate. Okay, in the US, they are much more open to this situation, but in the UK, especially in the last week, if you go to Spanguru.es homepage, the last posts that I wrote are people who are saying that they had to provide a P45. In Edinburgh, they were a bit more flexible, but in Manchester, for example, it didn't suffice to show an HR letter saying that you plan to quit in the event of getting your visa granted, etc., etc. So make sure to consult your official requirements and talk with the community and decide accordingly. As I say, in the US, they're more open to the situation. It happens much more that people work until the very last moment. And for example, just to quote one office, BLS office or DC consulate in this case, it says, if the applicant of working age and or employed, he or she can add a letter of termination from the employer stating that the applicant will no longer work for that company or a sabbatical year acceptance letter from the employer. And this must be in Spanish and or include a Spanish version and or be sworn translated. And for example, in Los Angeles Consulate will accept a notarized letter of intent that states your plan on quitting upon obtaining the visa before leaving for Spain. Okay, this letter and other letters, okay, like promise not to work, etc., etc. Now they're especially in the last weeks in Los Angeles, they're very adding like extra documentation that is not in their official list, just to like make you promise that you will not work once you are in Spain, but no problem about working until the visa is granted. And just to give you another piece of knowledge here to understand the nuance here. This is the case of a Venezuelan person who applied for a non-lucrative visa at the Buenos Aires consulate, the city where I'm from, in December 2023. And he was denied the visa because he was showing, quote, activity in his LinkedIn profile. I don't know what type of activity, but he appealed this and went to court in Madrid, and the court of Madrid said that the consulate was right, okay, to deny the visa. So have this in mind, how the consulates are applying all these interpretations regarding working. Be careful with that. Always the best go to with legal advice. If you are in these situations, especially these situations, sometimes you have a very clear situation, very simple, then potentially you can do it yourself and everything will be absolutely perfect, okay? But when you have a special case out there, maybe sometimes consider going with professionals who are used to deal with these situations. Let's talk about marriage, birth certificates, non-married couples. Married couples need a valid and updated certificate of marriage, which has a 6-month validity, unless stated otherwise, especially in each of the certificates. Children need birth certificates, also 6-month validity, issued by the authorities in the country where they happened, okay? And non-married couples, depends on the consulate, how open they are to consider them one single couple, thus reducing the financial burden for the application because it is a joint application. But in the UK, it seems to be much more straightforward. If you have a legal partnership, okay, and you make a case that you're a couple, they will consider you a couple for the purpose of applying. But in the USA, it is completely consulate based, okay, and you have to make a case, a strong case, by legal partnership, showing joint property deeds, joint bank accounts, rental contracts, etc., etc. Okay, sometimes you have a weak case, and it will depend on the official interpretation. This documentation has to be apostilled in the country that issued them and sworn translated if it's not in Spanish. For example, if you got married in Colombia, it doesn't need to be sworn translated because it will be Spanish, but it will have to be apostilled by the Colombian authorities. What about adult children and ascendants? What is considered adult children? Your child that is over 18 years old. You will need to prove that is financially dependent on you and part of your same family unit. For that, you will need to prove that this child didn't marry, for example, okay? And also you can bring ascendants as well, making also a case of the dependency from you. And here we talk more about that, but we're not going to stop into this slide. Now, what are sworn translators? Sworn translators are accredited by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who pass a very difficult exam to become certified by this institution. This is the only institution that can appoint sworn translators. No one else, okay? The American Translator Association has nothing to do with this, etc., etc. And these are the only translators that you can use for official documents. Each sworn translator has a unique registration number. Their translations are accepted by all Spanish institutions, including consulates and, of course, BLS offices. Translations are done remotely and signed with a legally valid e-signature. Therefore, there's no need to send physical mail or snail mail. Everything, you scan your documents, you send by mail, and they will deliver the translations, okay, to your email. You print everything and you submit that with your folder. Okay, and of course you can find recommended sworn translators on Spainguru.es that are so used to deal with this documentation, that work wonderfully with incredible reviews and very affordable prices. Just to make an idea, normally they charge between 36 to 41 euros per page, okay, for the usual documents that are usually submitted to the non-lucrative visa application. Okay, it will always depend on urgency and complexity. FAQ. Can I use my any translator from the American Translator Association? So this is very misleading. If you are in Miami, if you are in LA, for example, they mention the American Translator Association as a valid source for translations, and it has nothing to do with sworn translators. This is so misleading, and I don't know why they insist in having this requirement there, or mention as a link. It is very clear. Use sworn translator appointed by the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Can a sworn translator work with several language pairs? No, they only work with one pair, English-Spanish or Spanish-English, okay, or other pairs, okay? How much do sworn translators cost? As I said, between 36 to 41 euros per page, depending on complexity and how fast they go. What comes first, apostille, then sworn translation? Short answer is, it doesn't matter. Long answer, and this is the answer that every single lawyer will give you, is that first obtain the original documents, then apostille it, and then send everything to sworn translate, both document and apostille, okay? People will say, oh, but sometimes the apostille also comes in Spanish, but it won't contain all the text, and there's been denials, there's been rejections, okay? If you don't want to add friction to your case, translate everything. This is to be on the safe side. Okay. Of course, if you want to save some money, but also increase your risk, maybe you don't want to translate the apostle. And just as for people who join later on, we're going to have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. If you think the information I provide today, you can leave a Trustpilot review. You can click that button there on the top, and it will only take 5 seconds of your time, and it will mean a world to me if you left a review there. And let's continue. And also something, if you want to ask your questions, that I don't see anyone asking any questions in the chat box there, make sure to ask your question, whatever you want related to non-lucrative visa, and add a question mark at the end, okay? So I can easily see your question. Now, we're talking about during the application process. All family members must apply. They all need to fill the forms, pay their fees, in-person application and or pickup. Most of the consulates that work, BLS office is always in-person application, but some consulates work by mail. For example, Panama works by mail. San Francisco used to work by mail. Houston used to give you the option either by mail or in person, but apparently this, as of April 1st, so since yesterday, only by in-person application in Houston. So as you can see, everything is changing all the time. And something to have in mind is that once you apply and you get your visa granted, the starting date of your visa will open a 90-day window to arrive to Spain. Common mistakes to avoid: not checking the specific consulate or BLS office requirements, wrong or expired documents. Okay, they have to be valid at the time of submission. Wrong chronology, starting with something that is easy or fast and leaving the difficult things at the end. Wrong health insurance, not compliant health insurance. That happens a lot. For example, a health insurance with reimbursements in Houston, just because you found a policy that was a bit cheaper or sounded better, but it has some reimbursement clause there somewhere hidden, maybe gets rejected. Okay, that happens. Say that you plan to work or not enough proof of not working, especially if you're considered to be in working age, which is a blurry term. If they see that you look very young, maybe they will believe that you will work once you are in Spain, and you have to make your case that you're not going to be working. Okay, so you have to convince them that you're not going to be working at the time of application. Okay, and then as I said, after you have the non-lucrative visa, we enter into a gray area for remote work for non-Spanish companies. For Spanish companies, of course, that is absolutely forbidden in the law as it is. There is no gray area there. Now, timing. How much in advance should I start preparing before moving to Spain? In US and Canada, it takes a bit longer. Maybe in the UK, it goes faster. And this is just to be on the safe side. I know Manero says only 1 month before application. I think it's a bit tight, but they know what they're doing. Now, especially for do-it-yourself cases, start 6 months before, not gathering the documents, but putting everything together, designing the strategy, checking with the tax advisor the implications of moving to Spain, etc. And in the UK, a bit less, 4 to 5 months. Most consulates will retain passports during the processing, if not all of them, unless you tell them otherwise. So plan accordingly if you need to travel. US applicants can get a second passport quite easily. And in the UK, BLS may allow applicants to keep theirs. It is very difficult to obtain a second passport because the conditions to obtain a second passport in the UK are very strict, and applying for a visa is not one of them. But potentially you could make the case that you need your passport to travel, maybe to buy a property in Spain, and you need to prove it, and maybe BLS lets you keep your passport. Prepaid envelopes, sometimes you can, especially working with BLS, maybe you can prepare an envelope so that you receive your passport once it is the visa is granted or not. But in many cases, you will have to do an in-person visit to pick up your passport, and all the family members needs to be there, all the applicants. Okay, that can be quite cumbersome for people living far away. How long does the process take? The documents preparation is 2 to 3 months. Attending the appointment, 3rd month. Wait for approval, 2 months approximately. That's what it takes, 1.5 months. And the maximum officially is 3 months. It can also be longer sometimes. 10 days period if clarifications or extra documentations are asked. So if you submit all the documents and you are not sure about one document, plan that you're going to be asked for supplying a new correct document. So maybe you want to submit everything just to make everything there, and plan accordingly, and try to predict any rejection, because they will only give you a window of 10 days to clarify that. You can choose the visa start date. Okay, maybe depending on the situation, circumstances, the visa approval date, they will grant you the date that you chose. Okay, especially if it's after the visa was granted, but sometimes you ask for a date that is before the moment the visa is granted, so they will just assign you another date. And once they assign you a starting date, you have this 90-day window to enter Spain under the visa validity period. And then once you enter Spain, you will officially be required during the first 30 days in Spain to obtain the TIE card, or Tarjeta de Identidad Extranjero, or residency plastic card. Okay, you will have to do your fingerprints at the police station or foreign office, usually police stations, and then you will get your residence card, because your visa is only the paper that goes in your passport, the non-lucrative visa. That is only valid 90 days. After that, that visa goes away. Then once you have the plastic residency card, you're under the non-lucrative residence, just to be very, very clear and square about it. And that will be, for the first term, valid for 1 year, and then you will have to renew for periods of 2 years. Now, this Spanguru community member said, you can ask for the visa to be valid for up to 3 months in advance. However, the difficulty I found is finding a health insurance company who will work that far out, as most only do 2. And recently, I'm hearing only do 1 month in advance for the start date of that coverage. You can use Spanguru's recommended exclusive agent that has the possibility to move this in the future, potentially. And this is a pretty noisy slide there, but I try to put everything the most visual possible. Imagine that you submit your documents in date A. Okay, each of those lines is a month. So you submit, and in the submission form, you say, I want the visa to start in this certain date. Okay, imagine that you ask it to be 3 months after your visa submission. Now, and you get your visa granted, okay, just before that, and the consulate accepts the date that you selected. Okay, this date, the letter B, will grant you a 90 days to enter Spain. You prepare your move, you fly to Spain, and you enter in date C within the 90-day visa validity window. Once you enter that date, you will have officially 30 days to get your residence card at a police station, usually. Okay, and then after 1 year from the date of your residency card, which should match the date you enter Spain, the police officer is the one who has to type that, it will be errors. Then after 1 year, you will have to renew your first renewal, okay? And this is a period that starts 60 days before the expiration of your TA card and goes up to 90 days after the expiration. I will drink some water, excuse me. Wow, now the questions are flowing. I want questions, please ask me stuff. Also for other people who don't know that they wanted to know that. Now let's continue. And this is another visualization of the process. Excuse me. First, find your consulate. Second, check the official requirements of the consulate BLS office. Third, start collecting your documents and check their validity periods. Start by the most difficult ones. Police checks, potentially marriage certificates, if you married in somewhere strange or different, outside UK or US. Then obtain your medical certificate. It has a 3-month validity. Apostille the official documents. In the UK, also medical certificate, apostille. You need to sworn translate everything that is not in Spanish, okay, that is official. Okay, sort out the private health insurance, or obtain the S1 if you are a UK pensionist, if you want, instead of the private health insurance, and then book your appointment to attend to the BLS office or consulate. And many people say that this is probably the most difficult part, booking the appointment. And some people even start doing that even before the previous things that I mentioned, because it's a bottleneck in most consulates to get the appointments, and people are kind of desperate. And then you will attend the appointment. If you're applying as a couple, for example, you have to get appointments one after another. And then when you arrive to the office, you say that you are applying together, and then they will receive you together. But everyone needs to have a specific appointment. If you're coming with children, as far as I understand, also each child needs to have their own appointment. I know it may sound ridiculous, but this is how people report it has to be. Now, once you submit and everything is okay, you wait for the notification, unless they give you this, they require you for extra documentation or a rectification or whatever. They will not give you 10 days to do it. But maximum 90 days, you should have an answer. Usually takes 1 month, sometimes less, sometimes even 5 working days. In Miami lately, I've been hearing. I hope you are among those lucky people. collect the visa, okay, or receive it in your home, and then you fly to Spain within the visa validity period. And once you're in Spain, this is not an official requirement, but extremely recommended to obtain an empadronamiento once you're in Spain, which is the official registration of your address in the city where you're living, the city hall. This is a certificate that the police will ask you in 95% of the cases in order to issue the tarjeta de residencia or the TA card. Let's go back to taxes. If you plan to sell your property or other rights before moving to Spain, you probably want to avoid capital gains tax in Spain that are either higher than your usually the countries where you're coming from. So the best way you can do it is just to avoid those capital gains tax. There are ways to mitigate them if you're older than 65, if you reinvest the proceeds into buying a property in Spain, etc. But the best way you can do it is to time your sale and moving to Spain in order to fall into a different tax year than when this happened. Okay, so selling your main property and becoming a tax resident in Spain within the same year could result in CGT liabilities on the gains not reinvested in Spain. Just to give you a very simple example, if you sell in December and you move to Spain in January, you will fall into separate tax years, avoiding Spanish CGT on your property sale. So for this, plan your move, okay? Remember that you become a Spanish tax resident when you spend 183 plus days physically in Spain. So if you spend less time that year, that calendar year, you will not be a tax resident during that year. So you will not be liable for taxes in Spain as a resident, okay? So plan your non-lucrative visa application considering your stays in Spain if you plan to sell property or rights held abroad, so that you avoid this, okay? There you can see that the tax year 1 and tax year 2 start in January 1st and end in December 31st. And these are the most common ways to avoid the CGT. You sell in 2024 and you move to Spain in 2025. Or if you sell in 2025, make sure not to be in Spain 183 days or more. For that, you can move after July 2nd if you haven't been earlier in the year in Spain. So no days will be added to those 182 days left in the year, and you will be on the safe side, avoiding CGT in Spain. And I have so many articles and content and videos on the YouTube channel that I highly recommend you to read or watch. And we're coming to the last part, which is after the approval. Living in Spain on a non-lucrative visa. First of all, how do you arrive to Spain? You can do it from outside Schengen area or inside Schengen area. The Schengen area is 28 countries, so that is internally borderless Europe, okay? And what you need in your passport is a Spanish passport stamp, not from any other Schengen country, okay? Your visa has to be stamped by Spanish authorities. So if you enter first via France, you enter Schengen, and then you fly from New York to Paris, and then from Paris to Madrid, you will get your French stamp. But once you arrive to Madrid, you will not get any stamp because you already entered Schengen, okay? So in that case, you will need a declaración de entrada, which is a one-paper document that is issued by the police station, okay? And you need to do this within the first 72 hours of entering Spain. And usually you just go in the airport to the police station in the airport, or if you cross by road, go to the nearest police station near to the border, because a lot of people are reporting that many police stations, they don't know what you are talking about. But then when you go to do your residence card and they see that you don't have any stamp in your passport, in your visa, they don't know when you entered. And the police officer, maybe people show them boarding passes, etc. And the police officer says, no, you need to get out of Schengen and come back and get a stamp on your visa. So be careful, okay? This has happened and it happens quite often. So the best thing you can do is to have a declaración de entrada if you enter via Schengen, okay? And once you go to your fingerprinting and get your TA card, you show your declaración de entrada, and then the police officer has the official entry document that proves your entry to Spain. And the best you can do is to do it within the 90 days visa validity window. Can you enter as a tourist before? Yes, you can do it, but it is risky because of several things. I have videos about that and articles about that. The recommendation is always enter within the visa validity dates, okay? Recommendations too, get a Spanish SIM card once you're in Spain. You will receive SMS because of the procedures that you do. Open a non-resident bank account. It is very useful to have one because it could take months to get your residency card. and you will need to pay your rent, you will need to pay utilities, your gym, etc., or receive money from your accounts outside for your day-to-day life. Obtain an empadronamiento, which is the certificate that the city holds that has a 3-month validity, because in most police stations will require you to have one. And then, as we said, obtain your TIE card officially within 30 days time limit, which almost nobody can do it as fast because of the appointments problem. You had an appointments problem for the consulates and BLS offices, and you also have an appointments problem with the police stations inside Spain, unfortunately. FAQs. Is the padrón strictly necessary to obtain the TIE? And there are no appointments to obtain the TIE. What should I do? And here I'm quoting a lawyer who wrote this in one of the Spainguru's community groups about the TIE appointment. He says, in practice, it is not really required within 1 month because appointments can take up to 6 months without issue. So don't get worried if you don't get the appointments. Of course, if you can get them, the sooner the better, but there is no immediate rush because the authorities know about this problem that has been forever. If you Google appointments TIE, okay, or citas TIE in Google, you will see that there is like articles from 2012, 2009, saying like there's no appointments. So it's a chronic problem. Now, the empadronamiento for the TIE. This is tricky. Officially, it shouldn't be required. What it is required is a proof of address. And the big police stations in the city, they know this, that you will have problems sometimes to get your empadronamiento before the TIE appointment, and they will accept you other proof of address. Could be an Airbnb receipt, could be a rental contract, for example. But smaller police stations don't know this, and they will require you the empadronamiento. Okay, in Madrid, for example, even the big police stations require the empadronamiento. Okay, so unfortunately, because of the appointments problem, sometimes you will get an appointment in a police station that requires empadronamiento. So make sure to have it if you want to get your TIE right away. Okay, but this lawyer says that in Valencia, he's not having problems showing Airbnb receipts. Okay, and here in Malaga, for example, you can show a rental contract, and I have heard people telling me that it's not required. So, but it depends. It will really depend. Even within the same city, the different police stations have different requirements. Again, renewal process: how and when to renew your non-lucrative visa. Year 1. The moment you enter Spain within the visa period, the first year started, it should be the date that is included in your TIE card. Sometimes there are mistakes, especially if you enter as tourist before. Maybe they choose the date you enter before the visa validity. That could also happen. Therefore, the period to renew, it's going to be earlier. The first renewal for year 2 and 3, so it's 2 years period renewal, within 60 days before expiration of your TIE card and 90 days after expiration. So anytime during that time, but it's recommended to do before expiration. It's going to work better. Financial requirements for renewal: 2x if savings, as we said before at the very beginning, or if you have passive income, it will not be double the amount, let's say, in 1 year, but it will be double the amount in 2 years. We're going to look at a case study. The funds need to be available in the account when renewing, and depending on the region where you renew, they will like to see the money saved in a Spanish bank account or not, depending on the region. For example, in Canary Islands, they love to see Spanish bank accounts, I heard. So this is something that you need to plan accordingly as well. And if you move from region to region, something that you can do, okay, make sure that you move to a region and you understand the requirements to renew in that specific region. Now, second renewal for year 4 and 5 will be the same as 2 and 3, unless you move to a different region with different interpretations. And after year 5, you have the possibility to obtain the long-term residence, which is absolutely much better than having a non-lucrative visa, also known as permanent residence. Now, renewal process update, changes effective in May 20th, 2025. They added a renewal period, okay. The renewal period remains fixed at 2 years. There were rumors that it was going to be 4, but in the end remained 2. But they added a 183-day stay requirement, in which visa holders are required to spend this amount of time per year in Spain to qualify for the renewal of their visas. And this, of course, aligns with the Spanish tax residency rules, meaning applicants would become tax residents if they want to renew their visas. But, and I have a lot of content about this, talking to Ainhoa Manero, about the legal ambiguity that we are now and after May 20th, it stays the same, the legal ambiguity, because this 183-day rule is currently only included in the bylaw or regulation of the law and not the main law. Okay, and there is a Supreme Court ruling saying that this minimum stay requirement cannot be included in the bylaw. And the Congress did it before and now did it again. And they had to delete it from the current or old regulation. And the Ainhoa says that it will not be able to enforce this requirement even after the new reglamento starts to be valid or effective after May 20th. So now people are renewing their visa staying less than 180 days, which is the older requirement that was deleted because of this Supreme Court ruling. And people are staying, let's say, less than 180 days, not be tax residents, and still are able to renew their non-lucrative residencies here in Spain. This is the situation, and I know assess that this is going to continue to be this way. Now, let's talk about the case study for the renewal process. Let's talk about money. Again, financial requirements. As we said, a couple, for example, requires 36,000 euros for the initial application. And we said that since the renewal periods are 2 years, you will need to prove that you will have 36,000 for each of those 2 years. That makes it double, let's say, but in double the time. It means that if you only apply with savings, you will have to prove that you have 72,000 euros at the time of the renewal. But if you have passive income, of course, you have to count for that, how much passive income will be during those 2 years. Just to give you an example, if a couple applies and the main applicant has 15,000 euros annually pension, then in 2 years we'll have 30,000. Okay, so they will only need to show 42,000 extra money, okay, to complete the application. Okay, so you could have 42,000 euros in savings and 15,000 euros on annual passive income. Okay. And as a frequently asked question, what about rental income? It is not widely accepted because many Spanish authorities say that this income is not safe income because your tenant can stop paying you. So many administrations started not to accept this income. Of course, you can show it just to make a stronger case, but if it's your main income, rental income, it is dangerous. It is risky. Okay. And this is one of the questions that I have in my FAQs videos. Documentation requirements for the renewal. Generally, not only things, ongoing private medical insurance coverage, okay, or public health care system coverage. And be careful if you're planning to apply for the renewal with the Convenio Especial, be careful because it takes weeks or even months to have effective access to public health care. And in most cases, you will not be able to use this for the renewal because your renewal needs to be done in the first year and you will not have the documentation to renew. So make sure to have coverage from private health insurance when you renew, because even a day gap without being covered could be a reason for denial of a renewal. Okay, a lot of content about that as well. Updated passport copies for both individuals, as I say, ongoing health coverage, and no police records. Okay, be careful. People driving under the influence in Spain potentially are also denied. Okay, it is quite easy to get police records. Let's say that could be accounted for as a reason of denial for the non-lucrative visa. So also take it easy while you're in Spain and try not to get any record there. And you will need an empadronamiento for the renewal of the non-lucrative visa. Okay, that it is an official requirement. Not in all the regions, but in most of them, they list it as an official requirement. Now, time you need to spend in Spain to maintain your residence. This is also planning your strategy. Do you want to come here just for 1 year and then not renew your visa? You want to renew your visa? Do you also want to stay longer and apply for the long-term residence? Do you want to potentially become a Spanish citizen? All this you have to have in mind and design a strategy for the long term. Non-lucrative visa renewal. As we said, now people are staying less than 180 days and they can renew. But after May 20th, there will be this requirement of staying at least 183 days, but it will be a legal ambiguity. So we still have to see what's going to happen there. For long-term residents, you cannot be outside of Spain more than 10 months. You don't have to be consecutive. No more than 10 months outside of Spain in the last 5 years, in the previous 5 years before applying for the long-term residence after 5 years of residence in Spain. Okay, if you don't comply with this requirement, you won't get your long-term residence unless you have specific reasons not to have been in Spain, but you have to prove that, and they're under very strict conditions. Let's say that you haven't complied with this requirement and you don't have a reason for it. Potentially, you could renew your non-lucrative visa for a third renewal, also called extraordinary renewal, for 2 more years. So renewal for period 6 and 7 years. But this is not permitted for every region. For example, in Galicia, it's not allowed. They say so. Also, if you plan to do this, choose where you're going to go. And then nationality. If you're a holder, how much can I be outside of Spain before applying for Spanish nationality? If you're a holder of temporary residence, okay, like non-lucrative visa, for example, you cannot be outside of Spain more than 3 months per year before applying. Okay, and if you are holder of a long-term resident, you cannot be outside of the European Union more than 1 year consecutively, or no more than 30 months in 5 years. Okay. And here I talk more and more about the legal ambiguity of the 180 or 183-day minimum stay period for renewing your visa. And I screenshot the rules and the conditions out there, what was deleted, what was not deleted. But basically is what I told you. We're still in the legal ambiguity about the minimum stay requirement that everybody is talking about. Now, let's talk about transition to work permit after 1 year of residence with a non-lucrative visa, okay? If you plan to work in Spain, actually, you don't need to get your non-lucrative visa. You could potentially arrive to Spain with that job offer, or you can have a project that is approved to work for yourself, let's say, and you can get a residence and work permit with that, okay? But it's going to be quite difficult. It is easier, okay, if you can, to arrive under a non-lucrative visa, and after 1 year of residence, it is easier to modify that residence to a work permit residence. And there's two types, cuenta propia and cuenta ajena. Cuenta propia is when you have a project, you need to show a business plan, it has to be approved, okay, and make the case that this is necessary or useful for the Spanish economy. And if you're approved, you can start working on that project. Or you can find a company who is ready to sponsor you and make a job offer and start working for them. A lot of people say that these procedures are very difficult, and I'm not going to say they're not, but I know many people who went through them and successfully, okay? I highly recommend going with a lawyer just to make sure that you're not, making any mistakes when you do it, okay? And also the third one, these are not the only ways to do it, but these are the ones that I want to point out. You can also transition to digital nomad visa, and many people are doing this. Many people who are under non-lucrative visa with their remote work, as I said before, are successfully transitioning to digital nomad visa, and nothing is happening, okay? Which is very controversial, as I said, because for the digital nomad visa, you need to prove that you have been working remotely for a non-Spanish company for at least 3 months before the application. And of course, if you were under non-lucrative residence, how come you were working remotely and you're being accepted and not deported, okay, or denied, right? Because the Spanish authorities know that this is happening, okay? Now, if you are thinking about obtaining the Spanish passport, there are different pathways to it. For example, the fastest one, you arrive to Spain on a non-lucrative visa, you meet a Spaniard, you get married, and after 1 year of residence with the Spanish national, you can apply for the Spanish citizenship. This is one of the ways. But if you plan to apply it by legal residence, it will depend if you potentially hold also a passport that can grant you a fast track for this. The countries that are listed there in red or in the map, okay, Ibero-American countries, Philippines, Andorra, Portugal, Brazil, those countries, they can apply after 2 years of legal residency in Spain for the Spanish passport. Remember to not have been outside of Spain more than 3 months in 1 year. So 6 months in 2 years, okay, and more, maximum 3 months out for each year. But if you're a holder of any of the passports in gray in that map, for example, USA, Canada, Australia, UK, etc., then you have to wait 10 years of legal residence to apply for the Spanish citizenship. And of course, the application process of the Spanish citizenship takes sometimes a couple of years. I have heard also 4 months for Ley de Memoria Democrática, 5 months. Crazy fast this year in 2024, but usually you shouldn't count on that. You should count for 1 year and a half, 2 years average. It can even be longer. And remember, you can use Spainguru to find vetted partners that I have been working with them for 95% of them for several years. So they stood the test of time. And if you need immigration experts to help you with NLV, there you can find, and any other service that you would sure need, even if you're applying by yourself, like non-lucrative visa companion health insurance, tax advisory, medical certificate potentially in the UK, Spanish doctor. And here, there is a bonus slide because I recently ran a poll in the Spanish non-lucrative visa Spainguru group on Facebook, and I asked people 2 questions, okay? The first one, did you use legal help? 50% of them, 130 votes, said yes, and the other 50% said no. And then I asked, for the people who used legal help, do you think it was worth the investment? 77% said yes, and 23% said no. So generally, people are happy with the investment, okay, of going with professional help. But of course, it depends on your appetite for doing it yourself or your Of course, if you want to save the money from professional help, or you're used to Spanish bureaucracy, of course, absolutely, you can do it yourself successfully as well. Now, let's connect. We're going to go to the question and answer session soon. But first, you can always write a question to me at hello@spanguru.es, or anything you would like to tell me. Let's stay in touch. If you haven't joined yet, join the Facebook group, Spanish NLV, YouTube channel, more than 150 videos, half of them about Spain non-lucrative visa. Watch those videos. They're free, of course, to watch. You can opt out anytime. Newsletter, the same. Every single week I send interesting reads. And the content of this webinar is for information purposes only and it's not legal advice, and the requirements listed here are not official. Please check your specific consulates and BLS office when applicable, and what they officially require. We're going to go to the Q&A session right away. And if you haven't done so, and you're happy with the information that I shared today, please leave a review on Trustpilot. It makes a difference, makes a world of difference to me. And I would really appreciate it if you did it, because recently Google decided to delete my Google account on Google reviews. So I'm working on Trustpilot just to build the trust again. Thank you so much for helping me. And now let's gonna go with the questions. Michael, thank you for joining today and for asking something. Do bank statements, pension letters require apostille or notary? No apostille. You cannot apostille bank statements or pension letters. Okay. Some people choose to notarize them in the US, okay, but try to join the community and ask about your specific consulate and what people are doing, okay? Also, you have to know how many months of statements you need to submit. Some consulates, they state only 3 months, is fine. Some others, they say 6. Some others, they say 12, okay? Some consulates don't say anything, so you're going to choose what you prefer to do. To be on the safe side, presenting 12 is going to be okay. And also, there is also the frequently asked question about sworn translated statements, because, of course, 40 euros per page tends to be expensive if you have 100 pages of statements and you want to save that. So this also, there is no official requirements about sworn translations, okay? But I know Manero says that they translate everything. They have an in-house translator. But most people, they will just sworn translate the summary of the statement, not everything. And some people, they will not sworn translate anything, okay, with various results. Okay, so join the community and ask about a specific question for your specific consulate. And try when you ask, and everyone else, when you ask, mention the consulate where you're applying from, because maybe it comes to my mind. And also go on Spanguru.es, find your consulate on Spanguru.es, and try to read the first-hand experiences from Spanguru community members who are answering all these questions when they tell their stories. And once you get your visa, of course, write your experience so I can publish it on Spanguru for everyone to help. Next question, Enrique, thank you for joining today and asking something first. Planning to stay for 8 months in Granada, January 2026 to September 2026. 2, when should I begin an NLV application process? Passport expires in July 2026. Will seek renewal in July 2025. Is it worth all the trouble for 8 months, or should I just shorten my visit to 3 months? Or are there other options? It is a very long question to answer right here without making any mistakes. And it really needs to be analyzed, okay? Apart from the complexity of having to renew your passport. Honestly, like, be careful with my answer, because I don't want to make any mistake. I spoke before about how long it takes. You have to work backwards, okay? When do you intend to enter Spain? January 2026. You need to work backwards, okay? I don't know where you're going to be applying from, okay? But in the States, you should start at least 5 months before doing all these considerations, so you're fine. You are in April, asking about January, okay? But it takes 90 days to get your visa granted, and there's 90 days validity window. So you could try to apply, for example, if you apply in September, you'll get your answer in December and get your visa start sometime in January. So if you want, start before, so that the visa validity window includes January, okay? Now, about your passport expiration, you need to use a valid passport to apply. So you need to calculate that and have that in mind. Is it worth all the trouble for 8 months? Well, it depends. I don't know. Maybe it is a very seamless visa application, but definitely, as we said, if you plan to stay more than 90 days in Spain, you need a visa, okay, to be legally in Spain, okay. Also, some considerations: be careful about becoming a tax resident in Spain if you weren't considering that. Okay, I hope to have sort of answered your question the best I could. Michael, thank you for asking, can my wife and I make one individual appointment for the two of us, or do we need to make a family appointment? As far as I understand, you need to have both of you appointments. When I looked yesterday, there were no family appointments, but many individual appointments. Mention your consulate as well, please, and ask the community members. As far as I understand, okay, sometimes you have the family option, sometimes you don't have the family option, and you have yes or yes, do individual appointments, and people do, as I said, make one appointment right after another. Okay, so that, and when they arrive to the office, they say we come together, and then they're treated together, and they file everything together. So if there is the option for family appointment, then potentially that consulate or BLS office wants you to use that type of appointment. Okay, so Carmen, thank you for coming today and asking, if I apply for NLV with my pension and I get approved, but I'm writing a book, can I go back to the US and do book signings and speaking engagements? I understand book royalties are passive income. It is a gray area. This is a gray area. I can't tell you openly, yeah, you can do it. I cannot tell you that. Okay, but I don't see, I haven't heard of anyone having problems in that situation. Okay, so yes, that would be my answer. Michael, if I use pension letters for income verification at LA, do I need to submit bank statements as well? Normally, yes. You need to submit bank statements. Like, I never heard that anyone apply for a non-lucrative visa without bank statements. I mean, again, I could be wrong, but statements you need to submit in general. And make sure to submit the amount of statements that they require. Jeffrey, thank you for coming and asking. If you were born in Dominican Republic and you have a USA passport, can you still get it in 2 years? Do you have Dominican Republic citizenship? If that is the case, then you can, because, and be careful, because in order to get the 2-year fast track, you have to be considered a citizen of any of the benefiting countries by origin, not by residence. If Dominican Republic considers you a citizen from Dominican Republic from origin, and okay, as origin, then Spain also does and consider you a Dominican Republic citizen, and then you will benefit from the 2-year fast track. Now, if you can apply with your Dominican Republic citizenship for the NLV, it's even better, okay? Because then there is a total match from when you receive your residence in Spain and when you will apply for your Spanish citizenship after 2 years of legal residence in Spain, provided you didn't live too long before doing so, as we talked about. Sometimes there is a mismatch in documentation because people apply with an American passport and they don't have a second surname, for example. And then they arrive to Spain, they're legally in Spain, and they apply for Spanish citizenship, and then they can do it. But there is some sort of mismatch in the documentation, and they start to get problems. Still nothing, you're going to get in the end the possibility to apply, but it's going to be harder, okay? Another thing to mention is that legally, you should apply for Spanish citizenship with the nationality with which you obtain the residency. But the boss or director of the foreign office in Spain said that they're accepting the fact that people cannot apply for whatever reason with their 2-year fast-track citizenship for residency, and they will still give the 2-year fast-track even if you change your passport. So, for instance, you apply with an American passport for an NLV, you live in Spain, and then you apply with your Dominican Republic passport, and they're going to be okay with that too. Okay, so that's the situation today, but it could change anytime, unfortunately, right? So that would be it. That was it for today, unless you have more questions, and it's 1 p.m. 44 minutes. Thank you so much for joining today. I will send you a recording once I process this video. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. I hope that your questions were answered. If you have any more questions that didn't come up to your mind now, you can always send me an email to hello@spanguru.es. I always answer the emails, maybe not in the following 5 minutes, maybe not the same day, but I answer the emails. Sometimes I will give you the answer, the straight answer. Sometimes I will just give you resources where you can find those answers, free resources, paid resources, you name it. But at least I will go out of my way to answer you and point you at least in the right direction, if not answering you. And if you think the information that I shared today, this is of course absolutely free. The only thing I ask you in return, if you want to make me extremely happy, leave a review on Trustpilot. There on the top, you have a button there, and I really, really appreciate if you can spend 5 seconds of your time leaving some review about this webinar. If you use Spainguru before any of the services, if you use or read any of the content on Spainguru, if you mention that also, and not only this webinar, that would be even absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you, Enrique, Michael, David, and everyone else for joining today. I'll see you around. Stay in touch. And if you're applying soon, I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you get your Spanish visa soon. Bye-bye.